Talked to him a little bit about I don't know what we're calling it, the Trump attack, I suppose. Chris, right off the bat, we had some questions about security, people being surprised. Why wasn't someone on that building? Given them a bit of an assignment for next week, I pulled a lot of the facts about the attacker into like a singular document, and they're going to try to score him over the week as we learn new things about his profile to see how he might score on our systems. The floor is yours to, I know you've had some strong feelings on this when we started texting. All the threat assessment professionals start texting each other as soon as a case like this happens. It's like, what do you think? What's this going to be? And that was no exception with Chris and I as we were chatting about it.
I'm Chris Usher. I'm one of the consultants with DPrep here with Brian and the rest of the team. My background, former Marine security guard, embassy security overseas. I was a Department of State diplomatic security agent. We're charged with protecting the Secretary of State, foreign dignitaries on embassies and consulates overseas. I served in Libya after Benghazi for about 13 months. I've done security protection in about 35 countries, and I spent about 3.5 years on the Secretary of State's protective team, mostly with John Kerry. I was all from driving the vehicles to what we call the diamond, to team leader, to the AIC in charge of a specific detail. So when this happened on Saturday, obviously a horrific event, something that we haven't seen at this magnitude in over 40 years. Really, the last time we saw this was something at this magnitude was Reagan in the early 80s. So the first thing I posted on my social media was there's a lot of information that's coming out right now. Some of it's true, mostly false. We just got to take the information as it is and don't have this knee-jerk reaction of what's going on. So that's kind of where we're at. And after dissecting the last 2 days, the last 48 hours here, and watching the news and watching social media and the so-called experts coming out, armchair quarterbacking to an extent, it's interesting, all the stuff that's out there that once again is maybe true, may not true. So that's kind of where we're at here on Monday at 2:45 in the afternoon. What specifically, Brian, do you want me to my overview of it? I don't, or answer some of the questions that they've had.
Yeah, I mean, let me throw you biggest question that I'm sure you're hearing, and then we can kind of open it up if people have questions or you want to give an overview. But the big one is people seem surprised. This is actually how we started off today. A group like the Secret Service wouldn't have secured that building, and how can that happen? Even, and I'm going to steal your comment here, Vicky, because it was so good. Like I get frisked when I go into like the Garth Brooks concert. Like I have like a clear purse. How did something like this happen at a place like this? How possibly did they miss this?
To be honest with
I guess
you, that's the biggest question I have. I think that's the biggest question. And I'm going to use this term very, very importantly, professionals that have actually done this for a living. And I've done it for a living. I did it for a living for 7.5 years at that level. That is the biggest question I have. Now, my understanding without knowing, I have no idea, have not seen the plans. I do not know what their plan was. My understanding, that building was outside of the secured perimeter. However, it was still close enough. How that building, in my experience, and I have worked closely with Secret Service, with President of the United States overseas, is I don't know. And that's the biggest question. And I'm not going to speculate. I cannot speculate on why it wasn't up there, because that opens up a whole nother can. But it should have been. And something that close, it should have been secured. Why it wasn't secured, what the circumstances behind that. And I think that's what the FBI's investigation is going to eventually come out. Essentially, going forward here, there's going to be a lot of changes in the Secret Services protocols, in protection protocols, threat assessment protocols. So we're going to have to wait and see on why. That why is not going to be answered in the next day or two.
What do y'all have for Chris? Questions about this? What's on your mind related to it?
Hi, Chris, it's Tiffany. So my general question for you is, as we sit through this training, we think about being threat assessment professionals. What are things that we need to be thinking about that are priorities that maybe oftentimes get overlooked, or there's too many assumptions being made that we can do to do our jobs well to support whatever we're trying to do in our particular system?
It's a really good question. And I think threat assessment professionals at your level, I'm not sure what particularly your industry you're in. I think it's interesting that if you have questions and something like this happens, and this is the Secret Service, and everybody thinks the Secret Service is the end all and the greatest thing out there. If you have a question or you have a concern that needs to be brought up, we don't know what we don't know, right? So another point to take out of this, especially with the industry, the colleges, universities, businesses, this can happen anywhere. This happened at a campaign speech for a former president of the United States, and this happened. So we can't sit there as security professionals and say it's not going to happen. We can't, in this day and age, and what's going and everything in the world going on today, we have to prepare for the worst, hope for the least, and prepare for the worst. And I think this is it's an eye opener for us in the industry. And I do do think a lot of protocols are going to be changed. And I have my opinions and my professional experience on what could have been done differently. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of stuff's going to change on this. But ultimately, a plan has to be in place. And if you think it's a concern, it needs to be brought up. If you're doing a walk around or you're doing with your security professional or having that open discussion, if you're the person that's expert at your organization, you need to be open to everyone's concerns.
You know what I hear there, Chris? Just to underline one little piece, tenacity, the willingness to, like a dog with a bone, hang on to something, even if everyone else around you is telling you that, like, oh, this seems like it's more this or more that. The willingness to both question the status quo, really hang on to those core principles. I'm sure there was a chain of command issue where you can't have a group of professionals like that where someone didn't say, we probably should have someone on that building. And you can just imagine there's someone in the chain of command who's like, oh, let's not worry about that. Let's focus on your job. So the ability to have that, what do they call from Arapahoe High School, skeptical, inquisitive mindset when you're looking at whether it's physical security or behavioral threat assessment, a willingness to challenge respectfully these kind of ideas. And some of the data coming out now is that they was spotted initially for the attack. People reported forward. And I think a lot about remember when we were training on the bystander effect, that it's like, well, that's how we silo. Well, I don't know. It's the Secret Service's job. I'm just here to watch this particular area. There's a guy over there with a gun. That's not my job. So I think it's that personal responsibility and a willingness to really wrestle with those details and apply them. I don't know if you'd see that as related or not.
No, I think it is. I think it's important. When we talk about the bystander theory, I think we talked about this a little bit about these threats and these attacks that we never hear about that actually were stopped because somebody said something. Little old lady on the side of the streets told somebody something that was a threat and it stopped it, and we never heard about it because it didn't make the media, right? Because it didn't happen. So I think we in our industry and what we do and as bystanders are to be able to teach your students, your staff, to be able to, I don't like using the NYPD, see something, say something. I will steal a former colleagues of ours that says do something. And I think it is important to do something, whether it's to tell somebody in a leadership position. At the end of the day, we can say we did what we were supposed to do. Right. We did the right thing. I didn't say, oh, somebody else's job. Oh, I'm assuming the Secret Service has that, right? And in this case, and I don't know that protocol. I don't know what, and I don't want to speculate on what happened in there. I will say this from a counter designated marksman or counter sniper position. They do have to get permission to engage. So there is a little bit of a delay there. I will not say 100% that's what happened here, basically what that situation was.
Really helpful, Chris. It's one of the things I treasure about you coming on these programs, because it's, you never go outside your lane. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's a mark of a good professional. I think those observations that you have, even when they're taken with a bit of a delay or a grain of salt, the investigation's ongoing. It reinforces some of the work that we're teaching around a layered security model. Like if your whole idea of stopping someone who has, I think about, was it Becker's book, Just 2 Seconds, how quickly these kind of assassination attempts go down. If the way you're going to stop it, you're going to put all your apples in this one barrel of we're going to have counter snipers to it's so late in the game to try to stop it that way. It needs to always be this layered security model. What was going on beforehand? And it's my understanding with Secret Service, and maybe some college folks have had this experience too, that you make a threat against the president, you get some BFFs for life. Every time the president or a new president comes to town, suddenly they're going to take you out to the movies, they're going to talk with you, because someone has eyes on these higher threats. So it's interesting to understand some of the security principles that are at play here, as it relates to, I think, our work in a layered security model.
This course, and specifically this course, when we're talking about threat assessments and risk assessments, what we're doing, I think ultimately at the end of the day with our organizations and academia and our schools and stuff, you're doing risk assessments and threat assessments every day. It's going to be very interesting. That's going to come out in the days, weeks, and months ahead. The after action, Brian, on this individual, and I'm not going to say his name. I refuse to say someone's name like that and give him acknowledgement. People's actions before and their social media. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes about of this individual. And of course, there's going to be people coming out of the woodworks. Oh yeah, he was a little off. I thought he was a little weird, but I never thought he would do this. So many of those after actions that come out. Oh yeah, we thought something would happen, but we figured somebody else had it. And being in the positions that we are, and especially hopefully everyone that's taking this course wants to be better at, we can't overlook this anymore. This is what Brian does a great job when we do these threat assessments. And I consult with him on many of these threat assessments. He likes my candid, realistic approach to these assessments. I'm about I think this person's this, or this is my initial gut experience, because I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and I trust my gut very much so. But it's going to be interesting coming out about this individual. And he's supposedly young, 21 years old. There's going to be many questions on how he got up there, but ultimately he didn't wake up on Saturday morning and say, I'm going to do this. And I will say that with 100% certainty. It was reported on the Saturday night on one of the news agencies. Maybe he woke up. There's no way. There had to be some kind of indicators out there. There had to be some kind of planning. My understanding, I don't know when it was. The father bought the weapon, the rifle, blah, 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 blah. So there's indicators out there. There's red flags out there. There's tripwires in the industry, indicators out there. And this is what the threat assessment in this course that Brian has gratefully put together, and it's going to be a great course. And I hope everyone on this course is getting something out of this. Maybe something out of this course we take is, okay, that is something. Maybe we should do an assessment on this person. This is an extreme example. School shootings are an extreme example of this, but ultimately, maybe it's the person that's suicidal. Maybe it's the person that wants to do harm or bullying. There's a lot more that not the extreme examples that we can also diminish a little bit by doing these threat assessments.
Yeah, it reminds me, Chris, we had a workplace assessment. There was a termination of a volunteer. We actually ended up losing the contract. I feel okay saying that. Paid us for our time. They didn't want to work with us anymore. Partially because, if you remember the case, Chris.
Yeah, I remember the case.
Here was someone who was terminated, got angry, didn't really threat, was of concern. So they brought us in. Our main finding, and this was with Chris, I brought Brian in too, all three of us landed in the exact same spot. The HR process was bad. It escalated things in a way that they didn't need to escalate. So when you're dealing with a termination of an employee, ignoring their questions, avoidance of them, not engaging with them, letting someone go by distance, not having it, just like list after list were problems. And the company was a little frustrated with us because what they paid for was a threat assessment about this guy. And what the concern was, what they got back was, you have a number of processes within your company that are not great around the HR piece, around even looking at the case beforehand, before someone was hired, doing background checks. Like, these are standard, and they didn't really do those things. So I don't want to tap ourselves on the back and be like, look how great we did. But the willingness to stand your ground on that particular issue and say, yeah, the threat was of moderate concern, and that's fine. Here's all these other problems that are there. I worry sometimes when we do, maybe not us, but other groups, we're hired on to do a threat assessment or give an opinion, that we're hesitant to really talk about the true problem that was present. And their process was really the true problem. So I think when I think about threat assessment, the willingness that we have, whether it's a security detail, and Chris, I've seen you do that before. Remember don't want to out all your client details, but what we need is drones and like bullet resistant glass. And it's like, do you like maybe a locked door, maybe? So I mean, the willingness to I think speak honestly and directly based on our experience.
And I think that's professionalism, right? I think that's the pure definition of professionalism. I mean, to be able to give an honest professional assessment of what's going on. A lot of people have texted me on my opinion on what happened this past weekend. And I think a lot of people want me to bash the Secret Service. And I'm not going to sit here and bash the Secret Service on what they did right or what they did wrong. I think they did a lot of right. Can stuff be learned from this? 100%. But to be able to sit there and go, there was a mistake. There 100% was mistakes. Obviously, anytime successful assassination, someone a president, there's going to be mistakes. But when we do a threat assessment, at the end of the day, in the security industry, and I learned this at a very young age, as a very young brain, they can get it right 99% of the time. Security industry, we have to get it right 100% of the time. And by continually learning, and this is me too, my personal growth with working with Brian and on the threat assessment, the individual threat assessment side, learning about what individuals, how they're thinking and what their real issues are versus, oh yeah, that guy's a threat, we're going to kick him out, right? And I think by taking this course, and everyone here that I think is understand that we need to get better as a whole. And if we're not getting better, we're doing a disservice to everybody.
Great points, Chris. Absolutely.
Yeah, and obviously I'm trying my best to ask this question while navigating all of the politics that live in this.
Yeah.
But the one thing that hearing you chat about, and as I think about it, and I've never been to an event for Trump in particular, but I think about how it's characterized with all of the fervor. And then there's some places where there seems to be this, hey, yeah, bring your guns and all of those things. I wonder how untenable of a situation it is to begin with if you're tasked with that practical safety. And I think to your point, the philosophical butting of heads of, hey, this is something that we advocate for, but from a practical safety perspective, it makes it all more complicated. So like, I don't even know how to ask this question per se. Given everything that goes into an event like that with the different pieces, how much of this feels preventable? Again, this is a super broad question that's unfair, so I will own that. But it just feels like there's so many things here that make it complex in its analysis.
I think I know where you're going. I'm going to probably take the Switzerland answer here and say I'm going to say two things here. I think most events, attacks are 100% preventable, but at the end of the day, if you have somebody willing to die, it's almost impossible to prevent. Advocacy of guns and gun shun, I don't want to get into that too much, but I'll be honest with you, with a tier one national event, which is what this was, and I know the RNC is going up next week, there was serious oversight. It should have never happened. To get something that close to the former president is unacceptable. And I say that not to criticize the Secret Service. I don't know if stuff's going to come out, but I don't think necessarily the political gun issue really had anything to do with this. I don't necessarily think that at all. I think this was a huge mistake because it shouldn't have been that close. And I've worked with the Secret Service. I've been to events with Trump. I was at the LSU game when Trump was at Alabama and LSU was playing Alabama and Tuscaloosa, and we were all checked and we walk in there and they were up there doing that. And he didn't even decide to go to the last minute. Yeah, that's a tough question. And I think, and that's why it's very difficult. You have to be careful about just watching the media and depending on what side you're on. And I'm not going to get into that discussion, what their agenda is on what they're going to push, right? There's a lot of information out there on this was a hoax, this was staged. There's no way, right? I do not believe that at all. And I trust me, I worked in the government. It would have already came out that there was a conspiracy. Nobody can keep their mouth shut in the government. So to answer your question, it's hard to answer. But going back to my initial statement, I think 100%, almost every event can be preventable with the exception of one person willing to die. It's very tough. And the Secret Service will never admit that. Somebody willing to die and has the means and resources could do an attack like this, and it just happened.
We'll put that book up on the site. It's an odd one for behavioral threat assessment folks, but it was one of the first I read as a crossover. I think it was DeBecker, right? The Just 2 Seconds. The Just 2 Second one was just this lengthy list of assassination attempts with some really neat executive protection insight. And Chris, I think they actually used that direct quote. And I feel like there was a movie too maybe a Bruce Willis movie where there was an assassination where that quote was used.
It was Jackal.
Yeah. Anyone willing to take their own life. And yeah, so I think it's a good question, Pavan, and it's one I think we'll be talking about more. For our course, I'll throw you all out an email and just check the site, what you'll have coming up next week. I'll put that Trump document up there with some of the details I've just pulled from news stories. There's a lot of learning that I think could come from trying to assess the attacker as the news is released over the next week, just to see. I think one of the questions we always get is how often do we use pathways? How often will we use dark fox? When would something change? How could a key piece of information shift how we're thinking about the case? So I don't think anyone's going to publish anything off this, but I think would be a neat learning experience to try to do that during the week.
You know what, Brian? I don't want to cut you off because I know we're over time. When I saw the initial shooting and what the shirt he was wearing, the first thing I thought, I hope it's not a veteran, because I saw that shirt and I'm like, I hope it's not a veteran. The sleeve on the shirt, it's like a grunt style shirt.
Oh, okay. And this is what's coming out. Like one of the things that he was wearing, I think, was also the YouTube channel for Demolition. I don't know if that shirt.
I just saw the American flag, the OD green American flag shirt. And I just said, I hope it's not a veteran because, you and I talk about, that veteran aspect and our threat assessments. And I'm like, I hope it wasn't a veteran because. And
I do the same thing with like the mentally ill, or I'm just like, please don't let this be like a trans person like firing back. Like it's just because the backlash and it just forces. Teach all the time. I actually missed this today, but I spend my 5 minutes every time I talk about veterans saying they're not necessarily dangerous. It's just they have a special set of skills. But yeah, it makes the narrative about that harder. So thanks for dropping in, man.
I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you having me. I appreciate the questions. And I always like if I can have a platform to get a realistic overview of what actually happened. I think it's important. And like I said, I'm not the end all. I have great experience, but so many so-called professionals are out there are spouting some information that is not accurate at all. So.
All right, y'all. Well, thanks again for being here today. We'll catch up with you next week, same time, same station. And just check the site. We'll get some stuff uploaded there for you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks.